Our speaker tonight is Tigran Sloyan, co-founder and CEO of Codefights. Codefights raised $2.5 million in venture funding in April, and they've been featured in TechCrunch, Hacker News, Business Insider, and the New York Times. Codefights lets you duel with friends and foes in head-to-head programming battles, and they were among the first to join the Galaxy Early Access program. Tigran has previous experience at Google and Oracle, has 2 degrees from MIT, and has won 4 medals in the International Mathematics Olympiad. So, please welcome Tigran.
Hey guys, thanks Robert for a humbling intro. I'm blushing a little bit, but that'll pass. Cool, so great to be back here guys, talking to you all. I'm super excited to tell you the story today of how we've gone with Codefights from just an idea to 200,000 users with Meteor, obviously. So, before we dive in, let me take you back to August 2014, August 21st, 2014, right? So this was the first time I had to pull an all-nighter since graduating from MIT. And believe me, my life is not that easy, right? I have a beautiful wife and 2 little kids. I still managed to get some sleep at night, but this one was an exception. And it all started a couple of months back. So a couple of months back, my co-founder Aram and I had this interesting idea that why shouldn't practicing skills like programming be as addictive as playing something like Angry Birds, right? Sounded like a reasonable thing to do and a fun thing to do. So we said, let's set out to build a platform where engineers could practice programming skills while having a lot of fun. It was an ambitious goal, but we set out to do it. So a couple of months into it, we felt like we had something we weren't too embarrassed to show to people. And that was August. So we had a beta of Codefights. We started showing it to a couple of friends. Those friends showed it to their friends. And one of their friends decided that it's probably a good idea to post it on Hacker News. So this is what it looked like in August. It was super early beta, and you could actually code when you landed on the homepage, right? And suddenly that turned out to be very important when you're posted on Hacker News because, you get in right away, you start enjoying it, and it turns out to be a lot of fun. So August 21st, I come back home from my full-time job and some soccer. It's 11 in the evening. I open up Google Analytics, hoping to see 5 people online, some of our friends, and I see this. And I'm like, oh my God, this is so exciting, right? We're on the homepage, we're on the front page of Hacker News, but oh my God, we are hosting this thing on a microserver on Amazon AWS. This is so bad. So what happened next was, we're like, oh, so what do we do now, right? We have no idea how to scale Meteor. We've never had more than 10 people online, right? So we started calling for help, right? So like somebody, come and help us out scale this thing. Fortunately, I knew this guy that some of you would probably know as well. His name is Arnoda. He's from Sri Lanka. He was the first guy who actually built something that lets you deploy Meteor in production. It's called Meteor app. If you haven't used it, use it before you get to Galaxy levels. But I had him on Skype, so I Skyped him. Fortunately, he's a badass, so he's online 24/7. So he responded being like, dude, what's up, what's going on? I'm like, my friend, I'll give you anything you want, just fix up our Codefights. It's dying, right? Every single page load is taking like 30 seconds, please fix it up. And being a badass, he made me an offer I couldn't refuse. It was like, well, what would I ask from you, right? So by then he had this enterprise version of Kadira, which is like this app that lets you track stuff. I was like, buy a yearly subscription to Kadira and I'll fix it up. I was like, dude, deal, you got it. Here goes your yearly subscription, please fix it. So 4 hours into it, we had Codefights up and running with a scalable, more or less scalable setup. And by around like 4 or 5 a.m., Hacker News folks were happy. But the humbling thing is, even when it was breaking, right, when we were looking at the comments on Hacker News, people were like, I can't use this right now because it's taking 3 minutes to load. but I love it. I'll upload it. It's like, this is so cool. We're probably onto something. So the setup was on the top level, you got Cloudflare, which was acting both as a sort of protection from DDoS attacks or anything, as a CDN, and also as a DNS, right? And on top of that, sort of like a router as well, because we had essentially pointing at every single server we had. So there was like an A record pointing to it. And when users would hit the Cloudflare, it would sort of like route them through one of those. That will come back to bite us, but let's hold off on that, right? So the setup on the front was Cloudflare, and then was Meteor app. Meteor obviously in the middle. The deployment was on DigitalOcean because it's pretty easy to create new instances on DigitalOcean. I always say if you're new to sysadmin stuff, don't touch AWS. It's too complicated for you. Just stick with the basics, the DigitalOcean, and it's a button click away to create a new server. And we had Mongo HQ, which is right now called Compose.io for our MongoDB management, which also seemed like a good idea because none of us were database specialists, so we really didn't want to deal with like scaling MongoDB installments. So this held up, right? It was actually pretty well scaling. And for about 4 months after that, from September to December, we're just riding the wave, right? We're growing like crazy, and even after the Hacker News thing, the growth didn't stop. So we went from like 0 to 20,000 users in these 4 months, and we're building out new features, having a lot of fun. And in December, we sort of came out of beta, right? So this was our first major release where we actually introduced the versus mode. This is what it looked like, right? This is the versus mode, 2 people coding versus each other. It was only debugging challenges back then, so you got a piece of code, you are supposed to debug it. We also added 3 new programming languages. Back when it launched in beta, it was only JavaScript. So like the number 1 demanded thing was like, add more programming languages. I'm like, okay, we'll add more programming languages. So this was fun, but happiness doesn't usually last long. So we went back to this mode very soon after that. So in February, when the traffic was going even higher, the servers were just crashing, right? So basically, we didn't know what we did. And even when we asked Arnota, he was like, dude, I have no idea what's going on, right? So your servers are just randomly crashing, like every time you deploy or redeploy, or just it runs for a couple of seconds and it just crashes and goes into this random cycle. We tried everything. We even tried rolling it back to the place we knew it worked, right? And it was still crashing. We're like, what the hell? How is this even possible? This thing is working yesterday, not working today, and the traffic isn't even that high, right? It's supposed to work. Well, turns out, remember when I said using Cloudflare as our load balancer was going to come back to haunt us? So what happened is, this is how Meteor app works. So you've got this map.json file, right, in which you specify all of your servers that you're going to deploy to, so like the IP addresses. You also have got, obviously, your like credentials in there. So you run map deploy. It goes through every single one and does the deployment. On the user's end, what happens is when the user goes to codefights.com, Cloudflare receives this request, and it looks through your A records, just randomly picks one. Maybe it does a round robin, I'm not too sure. But it basically picks one and sends that traffic to a specific server, and Codefights loads for you. The mess that we did somehow, which took us a long time and a lot of hair to find, was we mismatched this, right? So the A records and our map.json file weren't matching. So there was a stuck server in here which was using some old random code when during the redeploys, it was just getting stuck there. So essentially in production, we had 2 versions of the app running. And because of this inconsistency, and because it's a versus player, so like, when you interact inside the site with someone else who's using a different code base, things go wild. You don't even know what's happening. So we figured that out, and we swore to always match these 2, or at least figure out another way to handle the load balancing. And we were back up and running again. So this was February, and by then we were growing like 60% month over month. And I felt like it was sort of time to actually quit my job and do the fundraising. And This is a completely different story of the fundraising, of how I couldn't quit my job earlier because I was on H-1B visa. I'll tell that story sometime else. For now, let's say the fundraising took about 2 months. We got 33 investors, raised $2.5 million. We're super happy, and then we went back to building the thing. The first order of business was building an awesome team. So we've assembled a team of what I like to call superheroes, who basically all of them has their special, like, awesome thing about them. And in particular, we got this guy, the front-end engineer. Somehow front-end engineers are really hard to find. I don't know if anyone of you has tried to hire a front-end engineer. They're really hard to find. So we found this awesome guy who does things with CSS that I didn't actually think were possible. But he does that, so we got him on board, and we decided to finally make Codefights look like what it should have in the very beginning. So we started planning our big redesign. So it was supposed to be in Google Material Design style. If none of you have seen it, it's pretty awesome. It's essentially these new guidelines that Google introduced in terms of how, like, UIs can be built. And so basically, since also our first year anniversary was coming up, we said, wouldn't it be cool if for our first year anniversary we launched this full redesign? So the redesign took about 3 months, and it essentially meant like a full rebuild of our front end. And the full rebuild of our front end also included adding a bunch of really awesome features, one of which was an ability to do large-scale tournaments. So we call them marathon tournaments. This is like a mode where instead of doing it one-on-one, you actually get together with hundreds of people and solve the same set of tasks, right? That's pretty cool. What that also meant is that it's a very short period of very, very heavy load. So you no longer, you get just random spikes. This day, a bunch of people are going to come online, they're going to kill your servers. So even though we were super excited about the whole redesign, we actually, you can see that link there if you haven't tried it, we actually open sourced the component library that we've built from scratch for building UIs in Material style. But I had this nagging feeling that these tournaments are going to kill our servers, right? So I was like sort of sitting there and being like, dudes, winter is coming. We've got to do something about this. And what do you do when like things are going wrong and you don't know what to do? You reach out to the Meteor team, right? These guys are always super awesome with responding to anything that comes their way. So I pinged Matt, one of the co-founders. I don't know if he's around, but I pinged Matt. I was like, Matt, any news from Galaxy? It sounds like it's about time. Unfortunately, he said, yeah, actually, it's sort of coming together. We have a super early beta, super early beta. It's like mid-August, but we can let you try it. It's like, please let us try it, right? So within 2 weeks, we were actually, even though it was a super early beta, we were up and running on Galaxy. And we're pretty happy about it. And the thing we're the most happy about is we had a 24/7 support team. That's awesome. Right now, we no longer cry and think about what to do. We just reach out to the support team. These guys built this thing. They know how to scale it, right? So our first marathon was coming up end of September, and we're feeling pretty good about it, right? We said it's definitely going to attract close to about 1,000 people, and it did. It brought in 900-something people, and the winners were like all these gold medalists from all over the world. And what happened, though, it was a Wednesday, 9:30, and, unfortunately, everybody decided to join in the last minute. So basically, when it was 9:30, being late, everybody just jumped online. And what that did is effectively just blew up Galaxy. So Galaxy went down, and we're like, oh my God, time to freak out again, right? All these people are like yelling at us, like, where is my tournament? And the page is just not loading. But as I said, right, having a support team and having a core Meteor developer sitting there helping you out with this is a huge thing. So David from Meteor support team was super awesome. Within minutes, he was on it, and within 20 minutes, the day was saved, right? So it came back live, and it has been running smooth ever since. So like ever since that one incident, we haven't seen any issues with Galaxy. And just yesterday, actually, we're on another marathon that had more than 1,000 people. And of course, everybody still jumped online on the very last second, but it still held up. It was still a smooth sail. So to recap a little bit, in this one really fun year, we went from 0 to 90 members, from 0 to 2.5 million in funding, and from 0 to 200,000 users. And we definitely couldn't have done this without the awesome Meteor team and the work that these guys do. So this morphing heart is a token of our love to you guys. Keep up the awesome job. Let's give a big applause to the hosts. You guys rock. And open up to questions. So, I mean, you got to remember it was yes. So the question is, how many users came online when Galaxy crashed? And the short answer to it is there were about 600 people who jumped online right at the same time. But the long answer is it was still in super early beta. So we've been warned that this is a beta, but we really didn't have any other options. We had to give it a shot. So
how many were online the time it didn't?
The second time, it was way more. So like the second one was even bigger. So about 700-800 people came online all together, and it still held up like nothing ever happened. Yeah, so the question is, do I have any idea of how many maximum concurrent users we ever had? And had no problems, I assume. So I believe the biggest one was actually yesterday. So at its peak, there were about 1,000 users online. And we were running on 20 containers on Galaxy. And basically, there was no change in metrics or like delays in responses. So do you mean like between getting on Galaxy and now, or do you mean overall? Just overall.
That's a good lesson.
Mm-hmm. So the question, to repeat the question, is there any particular modification that we did to really help with optimization? And the answer is, so the general topic, generally what has been eating us up was the CPU, right? So if you pass around too much data, and if you subscribe to data, nothing could ever go wrong. When you have very little data, that's usually fine. When your data goes to, our database size is close to 15 gigabytes right now, and when your data goes that big, and you subscribe to things like nothing ever happened, your CPU just goes nuts because it has to process a lot of data. So usually, the biggest optimizations that helped us were, how can we limit the amount of data we're subscribing to, right? So for example, for the tournaments, instead of subscribing to every single user that has registered for this tournament, paginate it, right? Subscribe it to 20 and show 20 per page. And another example would be if you're loading the fight, instead of loading all the data beforehand, just load it per round so that you can sort of space it out. Mm-hmm. Closing subscriptions, resubscribe. So the question is closing subscriptions and resubscribing is a good strategy? I've actually seen there is a package that does that, right? So that it basically cleans up subscriptions after you. I'll be honest, we've never tried it, mainly because looking at the code, it goes very deep into Meteor's core and touches things that I wouldn't have the heart to touch. So I was never really confident enough to give it a try. But it might be a good idea, right? Especially if you have a single page app where a lot of data goes back and forth, you eventually might end up with way too many subscriptions. So.
In that code.
Mm-hmm. So the question is, we support languages other than JavaScript now, so how do we evaluate the code? It's a great question, actually. So we have, it's basically built completely independently. So it's a thing we call, code runners. So those are workers that live in the cloud that just execute code that comes their way. So we have a system that can create a code runner at any second. So essentially, there's an admin UI that you go and say, create a code runner for me. What this thing does is it spins off a DigitalOcean instance where it deploys the whole system that has all of the compilers that you need. And then once the requests come in, it just gets sent over and comes back. So it's basically, I would say that's the only part that's very independent from Meteor in our whole code base. Yes, so the question is, where are we hosting the database? We're still on, now they're called Compose.io. They used to be called Mongo HQ. So the old Mongo HQ, the new Compose.io, that's where the database is hosted. And basically, they also do like dynamic scaling of the resources necessary. And yeah, so far we've never had any problems with. They also actually do for you optimizations. So if they notice there is a slow query, they would actually create an index for you so that you don't have to worry about it. It's pretty cool. Cool. We're good?
Okay.
Thank you very much.